Everybody see my screen?
Yes, we're good.
Okay, great. So just wanted to update on BIER, and hopefully we can get during the meeting to some conclusion on actually move it over to ISG. So we had Arch 05 working group last call at IETF 106, and I think we had all the active working group members chime into the last call finally to successfully finish the last call, and then Lou chimed into the discussion and raised concerns about not including the full traffic engineering components or description. So I forked off 06, where I added section 1.2 explaining the relationship to traffic engineering architecture, changed the name to BIER path engineering to distinguish it from overall traffic engineering. Then also the long overdue certification just called a controller BIER controller. But then there was the concern that path engineering would be a new term that Lou raised, and then he also suggested to bring in new text about traffic engineering. Deborah was concerned about consistency of terminology, so we've got some abbreviations, and that doesn't seem to be well maintained. So basically, we didn't have what I would consider, a technical, but mostly, a terminology and context setting discussion. Then, because it seemed like we couldn't simply come up with a name that would make everybody happy, we initiated, a choice for the names. Greg proposed to call it BIER tree engineering, which almost everybody in the working group chimed in and supported. I didn't really dare to do it because it also says TE, but I really think technically it's the best term because that's effectively what this protocol does. It does do engineered trees. It doesn't itself, care for the resource allocation along the tree. It just, does the steering for a tree. So that's now in the current Arch 07 that was submitted before the IETF deadline. I removed the section 1.2 according to Lou. He didn't like that. I just added an explanatory section for readers to explain the choice of the name. And I removed, path engineering or other terms from the explanatory text and just used the, replication steering, which were the terms that Lou was suggesting to stay in line with the, similar explanations, I guess, in segment routing, to which I think this is very easily comparable. So up until, I guess, 30 minutes ago, there was no text from Lou. I was just starting to read through it. Thank you very much, Lou. And I guess hopefully Lou is still on the call. He said he's double booked, but I wanted to quickly finish this up with the traffic engineering view from my understanding, right? So I didn't really find an official crisp definition in the charter or any of the documents. From what the folks I asked, they said was that it was pretty much derived from, what RSVPT is practically doing, and that is really explicit path setup and bandwidth reservations, maybe FRR mechanisms, but so far, for example, there hasn't seemingly been in TEAS or in PCE something about the real latency buffer reservation that would be required for DetNet. So, something like a very crisp definition of what we really call traffic engineering, what's optional, what's mandatory, would really help me a lot. Why do I think this document is not best called traffic engineering? Because it's really just a component of it, right? In the same way as segment routing would only be a component of traffic engineering, and the rest would come through the controller. And also, and this is to the last point of the slide, I think, from the last 20 years of multicast, we've got a little bit of a different experience of how customers really have done traffic engineering to the extent, that I'm still not 100% sure I'm using traffic engineering 100% correctly, but because we never had explicit steering of traffic in multicast before, let's say RSVPT point to multipoint, which has very rarely been used, but customers still try to do, good bandwidth management. There has been a lot of use of, for example, multi-topologies in IGPs, or just, hop by hop route steering with standard multicast. In the same way, if that's an acceptable mechanism, and today we have, I think a very good framework for these multi-topologies called the flex topologies, then in the same way, I would say for an overall BIER traffic engineering architecture, not only BIER-TE could be used, which I think obviously is the best option, but also simply BIER combined with flex topologies. And so that was kind of a little bit of the goal of the TEAS framework document for traffic engineering with BIER, that we would lay out, both of the BIER options, explaining how they differ for, how well they can support traffic engineering, and then also the other components like, what the controller would need to do, what, for example, if you want to guarantee latency, some orthogonal mechanism like, the large-scale deterministic network mechanisms we proposed in DetNet would need to do, right? So traffic engineering is combining BIER tree engineering together with other mechanisms. And so that was a little bit my best understanding, but hopefully Lou can chime in here. So, right, what can we do now, or what should we do now? I'm not sure what the working group here could do further, right? I think we haven't really changed technical aspects of BIER-TE in the last 2 years. We've, I think, exhausted now all the great feedback to help improve the text quality. Thank you very much for everybody. And so, I'd just like to pass the draft scene to the ISG for IETF and ISG review. So that's what I had written, right? So now, again, Lou has added proposed text. Lou's here. I'd love him to chime in. But I'm not sure.
So, let's see. Am I muted? Am I not muted? Can you hear me?
You're good.
So I'm taking notes as well as trying to follow along. Are you suggesting that we write a BIER-TE framework document that then defines all this stuff within our group that then conforms with whatever redefinitions and history writings taking place elsewhere?
Oh, no, of course not. Remember when Alia was trying to bring sanity to, the group zoo that we have? She was very clear.
What group? Hang on, stop. Torres, be specific. What group was she working on? What do you mean?
Alia as the AD for BIER.
Thank you. The BIER working group. Okay, go on.
So our AD was basically as part of the second charter round, trying to bring sanity into, what BIER should focus on and what should be done rather in the specialized working groups for it. Like, if I remember correctly, further extensions in IGPs should be done in LSR, and traffic engineering architecture that go beyond the actual tree building should be done in TEAS. So already 2 years ago, I put an initial version of that framework into TEAS, educated the working group to it so that if they're interested to discuss the actual tree building, they could do it in BIER, but the follow-up work for the whole framework or so would logically be in TEAS. Because it doesn't affect the tree building anymore, it would be queuing mechanisms, it would be controller mechanisms, whatever else it is.
And which working group is this again? I'm having trouble hearing.
It's like BIER, but just without the alcohol. TEAS.
Got it. All right.
As in the traffic engineering architecture working group.
There we go. Perfect. That makes sense. All right.
I mean, Lou, so what's the take here? Would TEAS accept such an architecture draft?
I think if there's sufficient interest in the working group, sure. And if there's not, we can coordinate with the ADs and have it done in this working group if it wants to be done. But it should be done with some coordination.
Okay. What's the read on temperature there? Is there interest or there's no interest?
Not sure. I really don't know.
Well, I don't think it's an interest as much as it's a requirement, right? If they're going to stand on this thing in the IESGQ because of terminology, and that's their procedure and process for us to clarify, we're going to be stuck doing that.
I don't think that there necessarily has to be dependency, right? I think BIER as the tree building mechanism that we have here, I think shouldn't have any dependency against building a whole traffic engineering architecture around it, right?
I agree completely. The question isn't technical. The question is procedural.
Right.
Stand on it and say they're not going to let it fly unless it syncs with their redefinitions of terms. We're going to be stuck. But let's. It's in the queue right now. I think you've done a great job clarifying all that. Just in full disclosure, my suggestion of TE meaning tree engineering, which I thought made a lot of sense, ruffled lots of feathers over there. Apparently, I wasn't playing nice. I don't get it. I was just following technical terms, and it makes a shitload of sense, as you mentioned, Torlis. I think you've defined that clearly. So a warning: they may still block it. I don't know. Let's push it. My suggestion is let's continue with what we have, with what you've done, and let's see what we get from the queue. That makes sense, or you think there's more to do?
So I think Lou raised the concern, right? So, and I was trying to explain through the text that he didn't like, that I withdrew, how basically, ultimately it makes a lot of sense to say there is BIER tree engineering. That's the term that the working group has come up. It stands on its own. It can be used, by itself with what we specified here, or it can be added with the resource management that typically comes along with the traffic engineering for the bandwidth, hopefully also for the latency, for the queuing.
Torlis, I agree with that. Is that in the latest document? Is there something that stands in the queue for them to read and understand, or do we have to talk to people each time?
So again, this was section 1.2, which Lou didn't like. He is proposing to have similar text. I'm just sharing this on the screen here.
I'm on the call if you'd like me to speak. I'm trying to be in queue, but it's okay if you guys don't want me to talk. But
I'm sorry, I think we didn't just look at the queue, please.
There's a queue, and but how I don't know. This is definitely a non-standard working group meeting, even interim. So you guys tell me how you want to run it.
Sorry, what was the complaint? There's lots of people talking over each other. I don't see a queue that you can step into. So,
all right. So I'll manage the queue. So Lou is in the queue, and otherwise either put the plus Q on the chat or speak up that you queue up. Lou?
Sure. So the issue that I raised was that the draft is called TE, traffic engineering, without defining anything related to traffic engineering. And I stated a personal preference in my initial mail saying that the initial mail to the public mail, that I would love for it to include that text, but that's a personal statement. As the co-chair of TEs, if you're going to use the TE term, you have to use the TE term properly. That was my complaint. I'll also note that it is in your charter to define BIER traffic engineering, not some other term, but that's what's in the charter. So, from my perspective, I think you should define BIER traffic engineering and what it is and the forwarding mechanisms for it. And that's what's in the charter. You should follow through with your charter. I suggested that it wouldn't be that hard to take the current document and do that. And in fact, did add some text. Yes, I'd say it's probably a month later than I said I would get it out, but I think everyone can understand that these are not normal times. So from my standpoint, I think you should follow through with what's in your charter, define the forwarding plane mechanisms for BIER traffic engineering. If you don't want to do that, that's between you and your AD. I don't think you should call something BIER TE unless it does that. Other working groups like Spring have defined similar mechanisms, and we've had similar conversation. They came up with another term. If you don't want to define traffic engineering, I'd say don't introduce a new term. Use the term that they're using. Path steering is old. Policy-based routing is a older term. They've chosen to use that older term. I think the some of the original internet RFCs, you can even find the term policy-based routing or policy routing. So, if you don't want to define TE in this group, that's fine. But, call it policy routing because that's what other working groups are doing, and that's consistent with the history.
Well, this is Greg as an individual contributor. The charter was written back when BIER TE was BIER traffic engineering. So the charter reflects the terms of the time. The pushback came externally and we had to change the terms. So logically, it sounds like that would possibly change the charter too if we followed through with that process. So either way could be taken. And in terms of policy routing, this is not a routing at all. This is just simply forwarding. It doesn't really fit into other unicast mechanisms at all. So yeah, I think you're right. And there should be an overall arch where this fits into what is now being defined as TE. But I think, again, our charter reflects a history that has changed considerably.
Okay, feedback from my side. So observing the discussion, it seems that the term traffic engineering itself is not well defined. Unless there's a clear definition they can comply to or be basically told that they fall out of the definition, I consider basically that people squat on the term. Right? You can't ask people to comply to something that is not well defined.
There is an RFC on the term and the principles. It's RFC 3272. There is a BIS document going on because there have been other complaints that it's not well defined enough. So we have a BIS that we're trying to improve the definition. In terms of term squatting, every SDO has its own terms that it tries to use consistently. MPLS is one, IGP is one, IP is another one. I think SDOs tend to be pretty sensitive to redefinition of their own terms. We're within the IETF. TEAS is an IETF working group. If you want to also change your charter, move away from traffic engineering, I think that's a fine discussion at the IESG level. I don't really want to participate in that. There's an AB on the line that he can comment on that. But I really don't think we're talking a whole lot of text to get you there. And I've sent some suggestions for this document. My personal suggestion, this isn't as, the chair or as I can't speak to anyone in the ISG whether they'll agree with my proposal. But, my proposal is include that, call it BIER traffic engineering forwarding, and be done with it.
I think given how the BIER, free engineering that we're defining here was the intent of what the working group wanted to do, and not stuff beyond it. And at that point in time, it was called traffic engineering. I would agree with Greg that we're very much right now within our charter scope. There was just a renaming. I think the renaming helps to distinguish, what we're doing here from a full traffic engineering solution, and I think that distinction should be made very clear. And I think that where if or where a full traffic engineering would be done is subject to, as you said, whether TEAS likes it or whether BIER likes it. That's a separate discussion that should go through that framework document. The text that you're suggesting here, I've tried to read it here in parallel. The main issue really is that, like in segment routing, the whole idea is to be lightweight in the forwarding plane. And so these traditional mechanisms that you're referring to have for every flow, for every hop, let's say a separate queue or interleaf regulator or these things, right? Those are actually open research issues. What we've proposed into DetNet to reduce the overhead net card. So that would clearly be something which, if we wanted to stick to the lightweightness of BIER with these mechanisms, is, I think, a much longer effort. So I think it's not unreasonable to make sure that we can pass on BIER TE tree engineering here with that name so that it doesn't get encumbered with all of that.
Per flow state is completely optional in traffic engineering and always has been. many.
You say this here, right? Example resources include buffers, policing, rate shaping mechanisms that are supported by
It's a
queuing.
may. Right above where you're highlighting, it's a may. In many traffic engineering implementations in the field in the wild today, it's only in the control plane, it's only accounting. Now, they're certainly true that some networks care very much about queuing mechanisms, but many don't.
No, understand. But you know, I wrote similar. I felt I wrote fairly similar text in 1.2 in version 06, which you rejected, but without going into details of explanation. And I was especially referring to mechanisms to do it statelessly, as an informational stuff. And I would have loved to see more specific opinion from you because if such a text is added here. I think it would be lovely to also include suggestions of the options that maintain the stateless nature, right? So that's basically what I would primarily be asking you, if there is any reason to not do that.
I mean, I'd have to see the specific text in response to this, but I think that's a completely reasonable way to go, and we can try that on list. We can try discussing the text on list.
Well, I had this. Let me bring up the 06. I think we may be running out of time.
No, it's okay. We have time. But here's a rough framework that I see that you gentlemen have to agree on. I'm getting Lou's point. I'm getting Tole's point, and I'm getting also Greg's point. That the terms then were when the charter was defined were slung around slightly loosely. So I think the first question is whether the 3272 is a binding definition of traffic engineering. It's an informational draft. It's fairly comprehensive. I see Lou's point that if you want if this is the binding definition and you want to call this thing traffic engineering, then you have to at least explain which parts of that traffic engineering concept you address or you don't address, right? So that needs text. You can just take a small slice and call it traffic engineering. So that, I think, is what has to be agreed on at the meta level. If 3272 is not binding, then there's basically no definition of term traffic engineering that I saw. And you can call anything traffic engineering.
My proposal would be to basically include the text that Lou has done with hopefully minimal, extension. That is basically the traffic engineering. That's basically what I had in 1.1. But basically keep this document called tree engineering and make it clear through that text that, this BIER tree engineering is a possible part in an overall BIER traffic engineering solution. I think, Lou's text is very good for explaining that relationship. And I think by having different names, it's much easier to distinguish between them, right? Especially highlighting that BIER tree engineering itself doesn't have to be a whole, a traffic engineering solution. But that's an option.
I think that's a pretty productive suggestion. Lou, you think that is a path we should progress along? So basically take the 3272, which you suggest seems with the text as the binding definition, and then have in the tree engineering draft explain which slice of the traffic engineering that addresses and what are the restrictions in in the full traffic engineering framework.
Yeah, I think pursuing the modified text is reasonable and something we can certainly do on list. I think acronym overload or TLA overload is a bad thing. I think that I'll defer to the IESG of whether they want to allow a redefinition of something that's a pretty old and understood term in or understood expansion of the letters TE in the IETF. I think personally, I think it would be pretty obvious that I think having that redefinition is a very bad idea, just like renaming IP or MPLS or OAM would be a very bad idea. But that we defer to the I'll defer to the IESG to have that conversation.
I mean, I don't think we would ever be using, TE for tree engineering outside the scope of, BIER TE, right? So the prefix alone, it's not as if we're coming in and redefining
The same discussion. We had exactly the same discussion with SRTE, and came, through the IESG, we ended up saying, no, you can't call it, unless you're doing traffic engineering, you can't call it TE. We did the same thing, had the same argument and discussion with SR. I really wasn't involved in that discussion very much, so I would expect that the discussion end up the same way. But that's for you guys to go fight. I think it's a much better thing just to make it's not hard to make this traffic engineering. Let's just do it.
No, I don't think that's true, right? I think that, I'd rather have at the end of an IESG review, they force us to call it, let's say, a BIER PR, right? For better public relations, path routing or path steering or something.
Public relations, that's great. I actually like it.
Path routing or whatever they want, right? Because, to me, architecturally, it's much clearer to say BIER TE is an, larger architecture which can use this BIER, as I still right now called tree engineering, right? But
why not make
again,
the
I don't
change
think
now?
we can make.
If you're happy with PR, why not just go with it now and then we
because
move on?
I went through the process of asking the working group. We have made a working group choice on that. So I don't think that on the naming, it makes sense to regurgitate multiple times, right? So if the IESG wants to force something on us on the naming, let's have them do it at their point in time. I think the working group has made a choice. And I don't really care about naming by now, right? So I
do you want us to do the same beauty contest in the T's working group and ask and see what people think? I mean, is that just one working group that? Well, that's fine. Sure, go ahead. No, that's fine. We know we're going to have the argument in the IESG. If you guys as a working group
and the IETF, right?
That's fine.
If we finish the last call after we've agreed on your section that I'm going to adopt, and hopefully you can try to get feedback a little bit faster now on that one. So and then we basically pass the 08 to the IETF, right? And then they can go over the naming as long as they want. I don't care. Is that good? At that point in time, it would, you can raise it again in T's. There was no other.
I think the use of the term BIER TE to represent something other than BIER traffic engineering is inconsistent with your charter and is inconsistent with how the IETF uses the term TE. I don't think it's a good idea.
Well, but again, right now here it is just the abbreviation which is overloaded. 25% of official IETF abbreviations are overloaded. SR means sender report, not source routing, not segment routing, right? It's an overloaded abbreviation. And we all like tree engineering. It's a great term for this type of tree building. The fact that the abbreviation TE is overloaded has nothing to do with this claiming to be traffic engineering. It's not claiming to be traffic engineering. It's claiming it's usable for traffic engineering.
Do we have an AD on? Do we have our AD on the call? Does the AD want to say anything?
I prefer it when the working group takes care of their issues. So so I think that terminology is very important. And if I've ever reviewed one of your documents, I want you to be consistent and specific and clear and all those things. I tend to not necessarily agree, but worry a little bit about the overload of the term, because clearly everyone's going to forget tomorrow that your TE is not traffic engineering, that it means something else. Now, having said that, Lou, you mentioned something about SRTE not being SRTE, being something else, because the ASG said so. As far as I can remember.
Just to be clear the SR policy document was originally called SRTE, and it's now called SR policy.
Yes. So what I was going to say is that there wasn't an IESG discussion about that. I am not the Spring AD. But I think that it had to do probably with the overloading. So one thing that I need to obviously do is, since Deborah was the one who brought up one of the issues as well, right, was concerned about this, and she's not on the line to say something. I want to talk to her and talk to Martin, who's the AD for spring, so that we can have a consistent, right, from what I said at the beginning, right, we need to be consistent in terminology and everything else. I understand the point that Greg made and others made around the intent or what may have been intended. I, of course, wasn't the AD of BIER at that time either, of what may have been intended in the charter to talk about. So we can figure that out. We can, I don't know, look at the history, revisit whatever, and figure that out. But the most important part is going to be the consistency. I don't hear, and this is not a call for me to make, but I don't hear a lot of enthusiasm to go to what Lou, I think, is calling the full traffic engineering solution in this draft, and leave it as tree engineering is what I hear from the working group. Of course, that's Greg and Tony's call. If that is what the working group wants to do, then we can figure the rest out, as you guys say, in the AESG, which means I would go and, as I said before, figure out what the consistent way of moving forward is with the other routing IDs.
As far as term thank you, Albro. I mean, as far as the term consistency is concerned, would just be lovely if there was, equal treatment, right? And given how many, terms are overloaded, that SR isn't even listed in the list of official IETF abbreviations. I think we're doing a lot of brouhaha here, which, I haven't seen on any other place in the IETF. So,
Can I ask a question? All right, to ask a question? I guess so. Could anyone, would anyone not be able to live with the term PR?
Or any other, right? Tree steering.
No, I'm asking specifically. Or can you live with path steering or path routing? What was your PR definition? I'm sorry, I forgot. I got stuck on.
I'm actually quite annoyed of, multicast always having to reuse, what I think to every multicast person could be confusable terms from unicast. Right? We have trees. We don't only have path, right? So something with tree in it is actually lovely. So if we had to change it, I would probably use something like tree steering or whatever else with tree in it.
Just call it trees?
Acoustic.
This is Greg again as an individual. What we're trying to do is, number one, create a document that's clear and consistent and can be used for implementation. Tree engineering makes sense. Within the constraints of that document, even if you knew everything about traffic engineering or knew nothing about traffic engineering, this makes sense. To chop up these terms and make them obscure to help some external perception of comprehension just seems crazy. We are literally engineering a tree in the header of a packet based on nothing that's routing, nothing unicast related. As Torles pointed out, this is multicast, it's multi-point. We've had decades of trying to shove our terms or borrow terms from unicast that never made sense. Right? And we've got shitty technologies that are built on these previous expectations. We're starting clean here, completely clean. And it's a tree that we've engineered. It just makes sense. If we call it trees, what are we doing with the trees? If you have a new consistent definition for us, I'm more than happy to take it. But making it less clear is not helping.
So,
okay, gentlemen, I think we have to slowly cut off the stuff. Sorry to be the grown-up. We are like 5 minutes before the hour on a 10-minute presentation. I think the action items here would be that that has to be resolved in AD ISG level. I'm sympathetic to Lou's point. You know, if we start to talk about resource reservation, right, all of a sudden we took the TE, right, and what do we do then? On the other hand, yes, the tree engineering seems to be a completely consistent term for what this thing is. I don't think we'll close the discussion here today. List and I would say ISG and AD. Okay. Greg, you okay with that?
I'm typing. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I think we'll
Well,
let
as far as the process is concerned, question. So I can do an 08 with, you know, hear feedback from Lou on that, and then we pass it on to IETF and let ISG deal with it, or what's your plan?
That's what I would take.
Correct. Our formal process is that once we sign the stuff as working group, we bounce it off to ISG reviews, and then the discussion happens in their context, which is wider, right? Yes. I do think that Lou's text has a lot of value, just as, you know, outlining how that relates and which piece of the overall traffic engineering architecture that addresses or not. So that cannot hurt at all, already as guidance to the ISG, and then we see how that plays out there.
I'll do an 08, discuss it with Lou, and then please send it forward.
Let's have the discussion on the list, please.
Yeah, of course. And thank you.
Thank you, Lou. Thank you, Torlis. Appreciate it.
Yes, thanks. So I think Stig is next.
Yeah, I'm ready here. Just make me a presenter and I can start sharing. Yeah, I need to get the ball.
Okay. You're now presenter.
Okay, great. Yeah. All right, so hopefully you see my slides now. So just a very quick update. So the MLD draft, in the last IETF, I was talking about this is the same slide I used last IETF. So basically, for PIM overlay, we decided that it would be good to have information about the sender of the message encoded in the message itself, so that we know the BIER prefix, BIER ID, and subdomain. And we decided that we wanted to do the same for IGMP and MLD as well. So last IETF, I presented this proposal in the PIM working group for extending IGMP and MLD, and that has now been adopted. That's the draft IETF PIM IGMP MLD extension. The initial version of that draft described not just how to extend IGMP MLD, but also the actual BIER extension. But as we discussed last time, it's better to have that extension in this draft, in the BIER working group draft. So what is new is that PIM has adopted this draft that only discusses the extension mechanism itself. And then in this draft, I have now described this extension here. So this is up to us in BIER to decide. So what's next? In the PIM working group, we are meeting a week from now. I hope many of you can, or all of you can join the PIM working group. We will discuss the PIM draft. One thing that we might have to discuss is whether the extension should be like a TLV mechanism where you can have multiple extensions, or just a single extension type, which is now in the draft. But I hope we can conclude quickly in the PIM working group. And here in BIER, I don't think there is much to discuss. Hopefully you agree with the format of this option. We're trying to have alignment, 32-bit alignment. Otherwise, there isn't really much going on here. That's the last thing that I at least think we need to do in this draft before we can go to the last call. But we need PIM. Yeah.
Quick observation, having read the draft fairly carefully this time, because it's so far cooked. Why don't you provide for multiple BFR prefixes? Because I was already seeing that the architecture is not very clear whether there's only one BFR prefix allowed per router. So either we advertise the stuff multiple times, or it would be possibly a good future proof to allow multiple BFR prefixes in this TLV.
Okay.
You already have the problem if you have a V4 and a V6 prefix, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so two things. I mean, I don't mind doing that, but at least my thinking was that you uniquely need to this, you need to know uniquely who was sending this, like identify the router that sent it, and to do that, it should be enough to have a single prefix. But if you think it's useful to
isn't the
learn other prefixes, so
already giving you a unique who is originated that? I'm basically thinking along the lines of things like V6 encapsulation coming in and people running V4 prefixes at the same time and so on. I'm not saying it must be done. I was just looking architecturally what we're doing and how people are deploying and what kind of tricks they're doing. And I realized that one prefix may stumble us over.
Right. Okay. So yeah, let's think about that. So one option is to just allow multiple prefixes in this option. Another thing we could potentially do if PIM decides to do a TLV-based mechanism, we could add, multiple of these types if you wanted to.
Of course. So that's my only observation. Thanks.
Okay, sure. Thanks. Yeah, so I think, I'm happy for any comments I can get. Otherwise, I would say, mostly waiting for the PIM working group to decide exactly what the general extension mechanism can look like. And then based on that, we have to decide, whether, one thing is we may have to change this option into being a TLV kind of thing if that's necessary. And we need to decide, if you want to allow multiple prefixes here. One thing I maybe realized a little bit is, what about address family? Should we just assume that if we get an IGMP message, then the address family or the BIER prefix will always be a V4, and the same, V6 if it's MLD, or is it better to actually encode address family here? I think for PIM at least, the decision was to just say that if I remember correctly, that it matches the message header. But it could be useful to have that flexibility, perhaps. All right, any more comments? Yeah, I think I'm probably done then.
So I think we have to.
All right, thanks.
Yes, thanks, Dick. No further comments. All right.
Thanks, Dick.
Yeah,
so we're at the top of the hour on a 30-minute meeting. We're going into a subject that's going to require lots of discussion on a draft that just got revved. So what I'd like to propose, and we'll get a sense of the room here before we move on, I would like to have this discussion. but I would like everyone to be prepared for it. And I would like a time slot carved out where we're not pushed against the wall and we can openly discuss without those time barriers. So my suggestion would be, let's move this to an interim. Even, let's wait till the rest of the working groups for the 107 remote are kind of fizzling out, and we'll schedule one out in a couple of weeks where we can have an interim working group meeting just to discuss the V6 Rex draft. Does that sound reasonable, or do you want to continue today?
And I concur, given already that I have an important 9 a.m. I'm missing.
Right, there we go. Okay. I was afraid that was happening already and kind of forcing us into that. Jim Grong, are you okay with that? I mean, I'm sorry for dumping this, but we wedged you in right here at the last. We pushed another 30 minutes and we're still against the wall. I'm hoping you would see if we dedicated an interim just to that draft, that we'd have a better discussion and a better opportunity for you to, express your case. Sound reasonable?
Okay.
Okay. Wow. Anyone else have feedback on that? Any more input? Everyone's muted. Can someone just say yes or no?
Yeah, it sounds good to me. I would like to read the draft again myself.
Perfect.
I haven't had time to do it.
I was just telling my mute button that it would be great if all the interested parties in this would remind the working group before the meeting to read the material so that we'll have an informed discussion.
Wait a minute, reading?
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so time to conclude, I think. We have notes with blue sheet. Anybody check whether the blue sheet looks presentable now? What do I do with the recording? Went to the cloud. Greg, it's automatically on the cloud now, and then
Yeah, one of us will get email that happened, or we can log back in and find it, and then I can just post it up there into Data Tracker.
Okay, anything else outstanding? Last comments? Right, we're done for the day.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for dealing with our snaffles here. Cheers.
Thanks. Later.
Oh, and Greg, send out the minutes. Okay.
I'm sure I'll have to invite you. Right. Thank you.